Hello everybody, my name is Pierre-Olivier and today I'll be answering to some of the questions my colleague have drafted out from my analysis of my targeted competencies. So for the first question from Marie-Pierre, she asked us, in your C3 analysis, you state that throughout your second practicum you've tried your best to plan activities that will entertain your students. However, in order to do that, you need to know what your students like. How do you plan on knowing your students in order to plan your classes? So to answer this question, I've actually separated it into two parts. I've jotted down a few ideas. So for the first part of the question, yes, during our practicum we provided activities and lesson plans that were entertaining enough, or so we thought, to the students, as they were related to their primary culture. However, we did have some setbacks. We needed, as a matter of fact, to follow the teacher's handbook. So our associated teacher provided us with a teacher's handbook, so a small textbook, where she would follow each and every sequences or units throughout the year with her said students. But we also had to keep in mind that she had a lesson plan that was already prepared and also a curriculum to follow. So when came the time to adapting the activities and examples to the students' needs and interest, my partner and I, we decided to adapt or change the activities that were provided or the examples that were provided within the activities. So for example, if an activity was revolved around the use of new technologies, such as when the first Mac computer system came out, what we thought was interesting was that instead of having something really old in their activity book, we would change it so that it would be related to their primary culture, something that was relevant to them. Secondly, in activities, if we thought that they were too old or too childish, we would try to change it around, try to add some entertainment to these examples. So for example, if a name was either too old or weird, we would add a student's name from the class into the example. That way the student would be intrigued, first of all, to hear his or her name inside an example, and would hopefully be motivated to participate in the activity. So as we noticed throughout our practicum, mainly throughout the first week, was that time is actually a primary factor. To get to know you, the more time you spend getting to know your students, the more time you'll be able to create or bring to them activities or lesson plans that might be interesting, because they'll be revolving around the interests that you handpicked from your students. For the second part of the question, Marie-Pierre asked us, how do you plan on knowing your students in order to plan your classes? Well, as I said before, given that we spend more time with our students, we'll be able to further see the needs and interests that our students have. Therefore, key is really the time management. As an example, during the first week of the practicum, I gave myself the task to learn every student's names. And therefore, when I first learned their names and when I first arrived in our classrooms, when I started using their names, they were interested because they were thinking to themselves, how does he know my name? What's happening to you? And it showed that there was a sort of creation between the teacher and the student. By the end of the fourth week or the fifth week, I was able to find some interest with my students. However, I wasn't fully connected with them. I did manage to provide some lesson plans that were entertaining and fun for them, but I didn't manage to handpick each and every of the interests my students had. All in all, I think that if I had been teaching that class for over a year, towards the end of the first term or middle of second term, I would have been able to fully process their interest and provide them with something interesting. the sad reality is I'm a student teacher, and we student teachers are given 5 weeks to perform. We have to connect with them within 5 weeks, provide lesson plans that are interesting, but we also are given a class to handle and manage in the middle of their education year. So we arrive in the middle. We're sort of dropped down from a helicopter, per se, and we arrive in this battlefield, and what's happening over here? Oh, we have to manage and adapt to the reality of our classroom. So what all in all, what I would do to get to know my students better would be, as I mentioned, trying to learn all their names. So have the list, the attendance sheet, memorize each and every name, try to remember which one, who sits where, if they have corresponding seats. But yeah, try to know their names really hard. Then I would have them, for example, at the start of the class, I would have some hook, or maybe not hook, some introduction questions. So questions about the students. Oh, what did you do on your weekend? Trying to get to know your students. So it's not one-on-one conversation, it's conversation as a whole classroom, because you act out as a big family. So trying to get to know your students in questions will help. And final but not least, it would be sharing experiences. In my practicum, I was able to share experiences with my students, and I noticed that it sparked their interest in my lifestyle, but it also showed them that I was ready to share experiences with them. That way they could do the same in return with me. For the second question, Marianne asked us, in your third competency analysis, you mentioned you worked with both regular and enriched secondary 1 groups. What differentiations did you have to do when building your lesson plans? What had to be changed, further explained, or change of vocabulary? Okay. For the first part of the practicum, my partner and I, what we did, we had both 1 enriched and 1 regular group. We didn't have to change any vocabulary per se, because both programs weren't following the same curriculum. One was mainly focusing on the acquisition of new vocabulary and simple verbs. However, the other group was more focused on sharing opinions, having argumentative discussions, etc. So all in all, for the first practicum, we didn't need to adapt. I didn't need to adapt my lesson plans to the needs of the classrooms. In the second practicum, what we did is we separated both enriched and regular. I ended up with the regular group, and my partner ended up with the enriched group. With the regular group, what was challenging was that one of them was mainly consisted of immigrants, child of immigrants. So students would come from different cultural backgrounds. For example, there were students from Africa, India, Indonesia. They were all, it was one big melting pot, and they really needed to, well, first of all, they had their mother tongue, which would be Indonesian, I don't know the African language. Anyways, then the second language would have been French, because they needed to adapt in the French society that is Quebec. And now they were imposed and basically obliged to learn a third language, which showed to be really difficult for them. So all in all, this classroom, compared to the other regular classroom, I had to go really slowly. So without going further, I'm just going to explain that both of my irregular classes were following the same curriculum. I had planned 13 classes, so 13 lesson plans different from one another, but both classes followed the same lesson plan. However, with the immigration student group, their lessons were cut shorter because they would take more time in analyzing the information that I gave them. It was harder for them to comprehend what was given to them. And we would have to provide them with more definitions, synonyms for verbs, words, and all in all, well, towards the end of the practicum, actually towards the beginning, I had to provide them with French instructions because some of them did not understand a word in English, and what they would do in return would be French please, French please. That would be the only sentence they would say because they knew that, oh, they wanted a translation back. So what I had to do was provide them with French instructions. I know this is not very well viewed. However, it was the only solution that I had found at the back then. For the other regular group, what I had done was some of them, well, most of them knew the vocabulary that was taught. The only problem was that their social circles did not allow for further improvement of the English language. Their friends, their families, strangers they meet in the street, it was hard for them to practice, well, at home or just in social circles because they would not, they could not actually speak in English with others, and others would not because we are in a French territory or province, so it was harder for them. But this was also the case for the other, they called it the groupe d'appui, so the immigrant students group. For my final question from Connor, I think he was talking about competency 6. Would you allow students to question, challenge, or change the classroom rules? So basically what I did in my analysis of C6 is I mentioned that I provided the class with a set of rules from which they would have to respect. So during one whole class, I asked them to stop writing. We stopped the whole period. We actually mainly focused on presenting the rules. And the night before the course, I had prepared a list of 3 questions. So I had them write on the board, and I would say, okay, so first question, raise your hand when you want to speak. Second question, what do? You don't, you keep your hands and feet to yourself. Why? Because other students would start crayon wars within the classroom. And final but not least, I told them, oh, okay, I want you guys to stop writing on the school property or material because they were carving their names in their desks. So they had 3 simple rules to follow, and they were given a list of consequences. So first consequence, they would need to get out of the classroom for 5 minutes. Then they would come back. If they would break another rule, they would be sent right directly to the, it's not the principal's office, but it's a sort of a detention class, and they would have to reflect on their inappropriate behavior within the classroom. And once they came back from that class, their checkmark list would reset, and they would do the same process over and over again. I know, like, for a student teacher, this is appropriate, but for a teacher, a full-time teacher, this would be a sort of a solution that would be temporary and not fixed, so permanent. So as a student teacher, given that we arrive in the middle of the school year, we do not represent necessarily authority to these students. We are just mainly another substitute in their presence. I think that in the reality of a student teacher, no, I would not allow the students to question, challenge, or change the classroom rules. However, if I were to be a full-time teacher, then what I would do is, preferably within the first week of the school year, I would sit down with the students and then I would ask them, oh, okay, you notice that in the classroom there is a really bad environment for learning. What do you suggest we do? And some students would say, oh, we can raise our hand when we speak. Obviously, this would be for secondary 1 and 2, because secondary 4 and 5, they might not see the purpose, or actually inversed. Secondary 2 and 4, 2 and 3 would see the purpose, and 5 would see further. Anyways, so with the reality of a full-time teacher, I would actually allow students to question, challenge, or change the rules, because they are the ones who would be providing them, and therefore if they break them, they break their promises, because they were the ones that came up with it and not the teacher, because they are the reality that they see in the classroom. They provide another another perspective of the classroom management that the teacher has to do. And that is fine. That is final. This is my last question. And thank you for watching.